thanks for joining me in this part 4 of my short video series I'm posting on YouTube to support the release of my latest book, which is my first novel entitled Sailing Towards the End of the World. I hope you're doing well today. If you've enjoyed the series so far, can I please ask that you subscribe to see the rest of the series as they unfold? And if you like the content, give it a thumbs up. If you've got any observations, queries, questions, leave them in the comments section. I'm always particularly keen to hear from readers. I'm not going to go over how to buy the book yet again, because I think by now, if you've been following the series, you've got it. Today's episode is going to be about the chief character, Jonathan the Tiger Palmer. And in talking about Jonathan the Tiger Palmer, I'm also going to talk about his counterpart on the mission into the unknown, the younger Belgian explorer Joos van Beer, and how the two have an unlikely yet complementary relationship which feeds both men's own ends. Jonathan the Tiger Palmer is an Englishman. He has become involved because he has gained an enviable renown or reputation as a trailblazer, someone of real worth, someone who was operating at the highest level in his field. However, he is a very, very complicated character, and as a person who created him, he is so by design, and I'll explain a little bit about that, because in formulating the character I did draw on some of my own personal experiences through life. The timeline of Jonathan Palmer's notoriety, fame, if you like, is that he becomes orphaned at a young age. His father is a shipping merchant who, through his nous and his capability and his own highly successful strategies, he becomes, in relative terms, a rich man. Therefore, Jonathan Palmer has two loving parents, and in the context of the time, which is the 17th century, I guess you could say that he's relatively well off compared to most. As such, in his formative years, he's relatively protected from the slings and arrows of what is, at that time, a very harsh period in history. Tragically, his father is lost at sea when Jonathan is coming up for the age of 8. His mother then suffers a decline in her own health, which actually causes Jonathan to be sent to be educated. In real terms, what is a public school at the time? It's a seminary, it's a religious seminary which is overseen by an abbot. Once he reaches the seminary, he is a small child for his age. He weighs next to nothing. The prose actually underlines this. He's immediately targeted by the school bully, the top dog, who's named the mighty Dick Darby. Darby is 2 years senior to Jonathan. He is one of the biggest boys in the male-only seminary. He is malevolent. He has a reign of terror over the other children. And when you read the book, it'll become apparent there's an inbuilt hierarchy within the seminary, whereas the abbot sits at the top of the hierarchical pyramid. The abbot is evil. He is operating under the guise of a man of God. However, as it happens, the abbot is in a position where he abuses his authority. He has a reign of terror over the boys, i.e. through physical violence and through sexual molestation. However, as it happens, the top dog is always spared the sexual misappropriation, the abuse. For whatever reason, it's never revealed in the book, but the abbot always leaves the top dog, i.e. the head of the pack, alone sexually, although he's not adverse to inflicting violence upon the top dog. Darby notices Palmer almost immediately, targets Palmer, and along with his cohort, they manipulate him into a situation where they start to beat him up, basically. It's at this point something is aroused within Palmer, and for the first time in his life, he fights back. He's much smaller. His limbs, as Darby notes, his arms are like his patter's pipe cleaners. His legs are like the legs of a spider. However, Palmer fights back and actually gets the better of Darby, much to the shock of the other boys who are egging on the protagonists. The innate strength of Palmer is introduced at this point, where he is one of these people where he looks like he's got next to nothing, yet he has the capacity for an incredible display of strength. That is partly based on my own experiences. I was working on building sites throughout the 1980s, trying to make ends meet, and at night, to earn a little bit extra cash, I was working as a doorman in a popular local disco. It was always myself plus 3 others, so there was 4 of us in total, and I've got recollections back to that time when I was probably in my prime. I was at my fittest and my strongest. The bottom line is, the people who gave me the most memorable tussles, and it's not to say that I enjoyed tussling with people, because I didn't. I was purely there to make a bit of pocket money. The people that gave me the most memorable tussles were the people who looked like they had nothing. I remember the 4 of us having to try and eject people who were much, much smaller, thin. They looked as if they'd give you no fight whatsoever, and they would end up ragdolling the 4 of us around until we could eventually get the better of them. Well, Palmer's one of these people. Palmer has got an unbelievable capacity for strength and stamina. So that is introduced at that point. Palmer at this point also identifies that perhaps the esoteric flashes, the capacity for clairvoyance, the ability to tune in and actually hear internally inside his own privation what other people are thinking. He starts to discover that this is not something that everybody else shares, because up until that point in his innocence, he has assumed that all others are just like him, and he starts to find out that they're not. So Palmer eventually makes his way through that period of his life, and he eventually joins the army. The British Army at this time is nothing more than a ragtag collection of militias. He is part of that. They fight in the Dutch War of Independence, and as Palmer says, they tread the dirt across the continent in places they can't even pronounce the names of them. They are mostly a collection of virgins with muskets being fired upon by cannons and charged down by cavalry. Death is something that he has to embrace. He embraces the angel of death like most people would embrace the dawn of a bright new day. He has to, because he has to survive. His telepathy helps him to survive this period in his life. However, tragically, before the age of 18, he witnesses more than 50 men die a violent death in the mud of the battlefields of Europe. One of them being one of his few close allies, few close friends, Matthew Ashton, who's his friend at the seminary. Just before leaving the army and the militia, before the age of 20, Palmer's potent capacity for meting out violence becomes apparent in bare knuckle boxing. He becomes the army champion. So prior to leaving the militia, he's put up by the militia against the reigning English champion. He is a formidable opponent. He's 9 years senior to Palmer at this point. Palmer's only 19. Palmer is seen as silage, a hopeless outsider, and is expected to be beaten in next to no time easily by Cribb, who is an absolute monster of a man. Palmer stands tall for this era at 5'11". That sounds by today's standards like a moderate, medium height. However, this is the early 17th century. People routinely are malnourished. They do not grow nearly in the same way as people in the modern world. So Palmer stands very tall. He has wide shoulders, but he is rangy. That is to say, not particularly heavily muscled. Unlike Cribb, who stands at 5'10", so almost as tall as Palmer, however, much more heavily muscled, and he weighs in excess of 2 stone heavier than Palmer. When he sights Palmer approaching the ring, he decides at that point in time I am going to beat him without any problems. But when they come face to face in the ring, Cribb notices the bullet wound in Palmer's abdomen and immediately recognises there's something about this guy, I've got to be really careful here. And sure enough, as the fight unfolds, not only is he matched by Palmer, but over the course of the rounds that ensue, he's actually getting well beaten by Palmer. Palmer recognises this and starts to ease the pace, and actually in the end the fight culminates with Palmer has Cribb on a plate. Cribb doesn't even know where he is. He's been battered within an inch of his life, albeit Palmer has also taken a lot of physical damage as well. Cribb has battered within an inch of his life, is barely conscious, doesn't know where he is. Palmer throws the fight. Afterwards, his second in his corner says to him, I know what you did, I saw what you did with my own two eyes, you let him win, why did you do that? And there Palmer reveals a key part of the benevolence within his nature. When he says, through a blood-frothed mouth, he's got children. It meant more to him. So Palmer let him win because he recognises that Cribb has a family to support and the fight means more to him, because Palmer has next to nothing to gain from gaining the championship of Cribb. After he leaves the militia, he meets the love of his life, Elisa. Elisa he recognises immediately as being the person who is his soulmate, the person he must be with at all costs. No matter what the cost, Palmer must be with Elisa. He recognises on the deepest subconscious level that she is the essential ingredient in his life. She falls pregnant and they run away together because she is betrothed to another at this point, but just like Palmer, she recognises he is her soulmate. They simply must be together. They abscond in shame. She is pregnant. She subsequently has their child, Oscar. However, as the years unfold, Palmer has the sense of wanderlust. He is an explorer. He's spending more and more time away from Elisa. She can't understand why he wants to do this. She has built him a wonderful home by virtue of his father's inherited wealth. She thinks they've got everything, but there's still something deep within him that even she as a psychic, can't tap into. And she says there's a part inside you nobody can ever tap into. I certainly can't reach that part of you. So that is a tragic part of the relationship. During his adventures, Palmer is in India and encounters a tiger which attacks the party he's in. The tiger attacks him and he instinctively holds out the rapier that is within his hand as the tiger knocks him to the ground. In doing so, it tears open his chest with a paw. But inadvertently, in doing so, the tiger has thrust itself on the blade, which sinks to its heart and kills it almost immediately. This is the thing that sparks Palmer's notoriety and becomes known as the tiger. In an era where most people are illiterate, there is no press, there is virtually no written word for all other than the richest of society. Therefore, people, the mass population, thrive on hearing tales, stories told round the fireside in drunken taverns. Therefore, Palmer's legend is born. Jonathan the Tiger Palmer, he killed a tiger with his bare hands. What kind of man is this? He caught lead defending the infamous siege of Breda. He's caught a musket ball in his stomach and he survived. Indeed, he's one of the few who walk in some part intact from the infamous siege of Breda, where almost all of the defenders are slaughtered. Palmer walks out carrying the lead of a musket ball. He somehow survives. So he's known as bulletproof. He's known as the man who defeated a tiger with his bare hands. It's a story, being a man who does not like infamy or fame or attention. It's something he feels is a burden, to be honest. On his return to England, he expects Elisa, having heard of the brush with the tiger, to run into his arms with tears in her eyes. Meanwhile, she has got real steel. She's soft, she's quiet, she's sensitive, she's polite. She has real decorum, she carries herself with grace. But on his return, she strides up to him and slaps him hard across the face and says, if you ever pull a stunt like that again, I will be mauling you, not a tiger. So that tells you a lot about her character. So Palmer is surrounded by sycophants. Friends in life, a maxim, a truism. If you can go through your life and have that many real friends that you can count upon during your life, real friends, you're doing well. When you're on the crest of a wave, when everything's going your way, Lady Luck's shining on you, and you lay out a banquet table with caviar and lobster and champagne, I can assure you, you will have a steady stream of people coming to sing your praises and pat you on the back when they gorge on your banquet and quaff your champagne. When Lady Luck turns against you, you're down on your luck, and you put water on the same banquet table and mince and potatoes, how many people do you think will sit at that banquet table and sing your praises and pat your back? You'll be lucky if there's anybody there. So Palmer recognises this. However, the friction that's caused between his relationship with him and Elisa is she perceives it as being unresolvable. Therefore, at her behest, she decides the marriage is over. She can't take any more. She can't take any more of him being away, of hitting the bottle, because that's another aspect of Palmer. He has such ascetic tendencies. He takes life seriously. He cares intensely about people. He is benevolent. He is a caregiver. He has empathy. This is almost always unreciprocated. This is what causes him to leave the militia. The empathy he feels for the common men who are left outside in the cold to sleep whilst he's in a small hut with a little hearth. He can't reconcile himself to that, and that's a big reason why he leaves the militia. The relationship breaks down. He has a tremendous unease within his heart. He is devastated, emotionally devastated. He falls into the arms of another woman and has a brief affair, even though she is married as well. Although he does end it because he finally gets a grip of his drinking, gets a grip of himself, and seeks out Elisa and seeks the reconciliation. They decide ultimately to make a go of it again, and he's as good to his word. He stops boozing, he stops going off on adventures. However, they decide to start a new life. As they're making their way, and they're doing so incidentally to avoid the political chaos of the unfolding English Civil War, because Palmer knows on some level he is going to be coerced into choosing sides, and he is not interested anymore in being manipulated to further others' strategies, schemes and agendas. He has decided he will choose his own fate from this point on. He's a disaffected soldier. He suffers from post-traumatic stress, as it is, because of the battlefields of Europe. Tragically, as he's making away across the Irish Sea with his family, the vessel gets into trouble and sinks, during which Elisa and Oscar, Elisa is pregnant at this point, I must add, they perish, and Palmer somehow finds himself afloat upon a piece of flotsam. However, during the tragedy, he's broke his back and shattered his wrist. After this, he feels tremendous guilt that he wasn't able to save his wife and child. As he says later on in the book, it's the only fight in my life I ever lost. It was during the tragedy. He can't deal with the guilt. He can't deal with the shame that he meets upon himself. He pours guilt and shame upon himself. And this is not even to mention the grief, the sadness, the anger that he feels. Because of the pain of the injuries he sustained, he is prescribed opium as an analgesic. He becomes hooked on opium. This was partly inspired by my own experience. In 2008, I suffered a very bad back injury, which took me over 8 years to actually get over. 8 years of intensive physiotherapy. That was also 8 years of eating painkillers. I was on opiates for quite a long period of time, strong prescription opiates. And when I decided that I needed to get off the opiates, it was very difficult to get off the prescribed medication. However, that was partly inspired by my own, I would say, struggle to remove myself, detox myself from the opiates I had been prescribed after my own bad back injury. Opium replaces Elisa as the vital ingredient in his life. The opiate is his worst enemy, albeit for the time he thinks it's his best friend. It doesn't take away the grief, the sadness, the shame, the pain, but it allows him separation to escape from his own aesthetic self, discerning self. He's self-critical. He sets a very high standard for himself. He feels he has let the people who matter to him most down. Palmer absconds to the Far East, where he decides he is going to take opium in an opium den until it kills him. He gifts, prior to leaving England, he gifts most of his inherited capital to the needy. Again, which underlines the benevolence within his nature. So, a complicated character. He has a capacity for violence. He has almost superhuman strength. He is telepathic, although he is very, very introverted, quiet, shy, and humble. When he is coerced into partaking upon the VOC's mission, he meets his counterpart, Joos Van Beer, who is a younger Belgian explorer who has many things in common with Palmer. Joos Van Beer is sighted by Palmer for the first time sauntering down the quay, dressed like a peacock, whistling gaily. Van Beer is an extrovert. He is a show-off. He has an ego. He never stops talking, or as Palmer puts it, he never shuts the hell up. But Van Beer and him form, over the duration of the mission, an unlikely bond. This is where the interdependence of opposites comes into play. They are two sides of the same coin. Van Beer fits all of the gaps in Palmer's own nature, persona, character, and vice versa. Palmer does likewise for Van Beyer. Together they are a whole. So Van Beyer himself has quite a complicated history. What exactly fueled Van Beyer on board is a bit of a mystery until the closing chapters of the book, where all is revealed and more similarities to Palmer's own situation are laid bare. It's an interesting interplay throughout the book between the two. Van Beyer, the extroverted show-off who has a big ego. Van Beyer, in truth, hero worships Palmer to an extent. He really looks up to Palmer. Palmer is someone he's idolised from afar. They meet for the first time on board the mission. Palmer is initially of great disappointment to Van Beyer because he's taken aback at his sullenness, his gloomy pessimism. He appears gaunt and older than his age. Palmer, again, similarly, on initially meeting Van Beyer, is not particularly impressed. Van Beyer asks Palmer, tell me about how you beat a tiger with your bare hands, and Palmer immediately kills the legend, pours cold water on it by saying it was not an act of valour or bravery on my part, it was luck. I got lucky. He shatters Van Beyer's illusion almost at the outset. So again, I'm not going to spoil the story, and I'm aware that this has gone on a lot longer than I wanted it to go on. There it is, interdependence of opposites, and this is a theme throughout the book, and I'm going to look at the same theme with a couple of other interesting characters in the next video. I hope you've liked this. Again, if you want to tap into the videos, subscribe. That's the best thing I'm going to say. There's more to come, there's a lot more to come. So I'll leave it at that, and I hope you enjoy reading about it. In the meantime, until we meet again, take care.